Hello, Rune Scholar, wherever and whenever you are. I'm the Modern Erilar. In our last episode, I described the runes of the Vikings who founded Novgorod, Kyiv, and Polotsk, towns and principalities which were ancestors to modern Ukraine and Russia. I also described the Swedish connection to the Rus through runestones and runic inscriptions. On the Pilgord's runestone, for example, Hegbjörn, Rodvisel, Ostein, and Emund commemorate a Rafen who penetrated far into the Eifer, a cataract or set of rapids on the Dnieper River, possibly under the command of someone called Vifil. But these Vikings were not from the Swedish mainland. Today, let's talk about a second, culturally distinct group who also voyaged along the Eastern Way, the Vikings from the Baltic Islands of Gotland, Öland, which are both now part of Sweden, and Bornholm, which is now part of Denmark. While these Baltic islands are frequently grouped together, each island developed a strong local identity expressed through a distinctive material culture, and more differences separate these islands than links that connect them. The rune stones have their own character on each island, with a pointed shape on Öland and a keyhole shape on Gotland. Of the three, Gotland shows evidence for runic writing on many different kinds of everyday objects, whereas inscriptions on Bornholm are restricted to runestones and amulets only, with Öland being, both geographically and culturally, somewhere in the middle. Let's start with Gotland. The Kylver Stone, which I described in episode 4, is the oldest surviving inscription containing the entire Elder Futhark rune row. Some of the runes are backwards or upside down, or only partially complete, but the runes are recognizably the 24 runes of the Elder Futhark. It was recovered on Gotland and dates to around 400 of the Common Era. So the length of time that runic literacy, or runacy, was established on the island may have contributed to the pervasive use of runes in Gotlandic culture. Many more runestones from Gotland date to the Viking Age, the most famous of which are the keyhole-shaped picture stones, so called for their large graphics. About a third of the 50 Swedish runic inscriptions from the 9th and 10th centuries were recovered on Gotland, and the majority of those are on picture stones of a uniquely Gutnish character. Later stones from the 11th and 12th centuries have more in common in terms of composition and motif with the Uppland runestones. In cultural aspects other than writing, Gotland had a unique culture. Brooch styles in women's dress were different. Instead of ovals, Gotlandic women wore brooches shaped like round boxes or animal heads. Elaborating on Lena Thunmark Nyland's Gotlandic paradox, differences in cultural anthropology often develop to contrast with outgroups, leading to increased cultural distinctions along border zones. We may be seeing that here. The language spoken on Gotland during the Viking Age was Old Gutnish, which very generally speaking, due to a mix of geographic isolation and continuous contact with the Scandinavian mainland, is a blend of Old West Norse and Old East Norse, with some distinct developments unique to the island. Some consonant variation appears in specific words, like Iftir on the mainland is Iptir on Gotland sometimes, and similarly Husfroya on the mainland is Husproya on Gotland. In Old Gutnish, the 9 short and long vowels of Old West Norse and Old East are reduced to 6, and they kept a short U vowel, which in Old Swedish would have evolved into an O sound. Diphthongs in words like stein and draumber from Proto-Scandinavian persisted on Gotland well into the Viking period, when on the mainland, diphthongs evolved into sten and drömer, and different vowels affected syllables differently on Gotland. For you linguistics enthusiasts out there, there was much more I umlaut than U umlaut in Gutnish. If we look at the runes themselves, both long branch and short twig runes are present on Gotland, and interestingly, there seems to be a division among the inscriptions on Gotland, both geographically and chronologically. Those with short twig runes were located in the northern half of the island, and all of these date to 1000 of the Common Era and prior. Long branch runes were concentrated to the south of the island, and most date to the 11th century, though an amulet from a burial in Holbens and one runestone from Grötlingberöes date to the 8th century. If you think back to episode 11 on Sweden at large, the chronological and geographic division between short twig and long branch inscriptions was also true for mainland Sweden. So, what Gotlandic Futharks survive? For short twig inscriptions, again we'll have to aggregate into a full rune row like we did in Norway, and there are relatively few surviving inscriptions with which to do so. If we start from the Tjengvidda runestone from the Viking Age and supplement with runes from the remaining short twig inscriptions, we can arrive at a rune row with some interesting variants. The fully crossing T and L runes seem to show up in the 8th century, for example on the Gotham's stone. And this ending R rune that looks exactly like the half-height Ir from the Kievan Rus rune row is from the Hangvars stone from the 9th century. If you're interested in the changing thinking in runology regarding the chronological development of short twig runes specifically, Magnus Kjellström has a good summary in his article in Relations in Runes, which citation I'll give you in the usual further reading section at the end. Inscriptions carved exclusively in long branch runes almost always appeared in coastal areas. The Västers whetstone is no exception. It features a full long branch Younger Futhark rune row that nearly duplicates our 10th to 11th century Norwegian mixed long branch rune row from episode 9, with small differences. In the nasal A or O rune, the branches fully cross the stave. So this gives us a second option for a Gotlandic rune row, transcribed here, and both short twig and long branch options for writing. Only Gotland shows evidence of inscriptions on brooches or weapons of the Viking period, as well as one inscription on a silver bowl. One of the very few Gotlandic runic amulets, inscription G278, has a long inscription with Latin phrases and repeats a woman's name, Gudlaug, which is not typical for the island. Gotlanders were much more likely to create ownership tags and labels on practical objects. Let's turn now to Öland. Öland seems not to have had writing during the migration period, and only 2 or 3 early short twig inscriptions survive. So most of the almost 200 inscriptions we have are long branch Younger Futhark. For example, this inscription on a stone that is either a whetstone for sharpening or a touchstone for assessing the carat value of precious metals was recovered from Bornholm. Runic amulets on metal plates appeared more systematically on Öland than on Gotland, in that at least 5 survive on Öland. This 11th century lead amulet from Övre van Borga is difficult to interpret, but Helmer Gustafsson has suggested it could possibly read, "I bring the 3-headed spirit, the earth-soiled one, from the man's woman. I bring him where he belongs, on the front, and may he end his journey in the fire, on the reverse. Very inspiring. For a full rune row, we can compile a Futhark from Öland inscriptions 26 and 27, the two sides of the Sandby runestone. This first double branch O variant comes from Sandby, which is in the northeastern part of the island, whereas the variant with the branches sloping in the opposite direction is from a contemporary stone at Lerkaka in the east central part of the island, which is inscription 37. Very few runic inscriptions survive from the island of Bornholm, and all appear in settlement contexts. We're getting more of them now due to metal detecting being legal here. The earliest inscriptions are 3 golden bracteates and a piece of antler handle from a chieftain's settlement at Sortemuld. The antler piece was carved so that it had 3 sides, and Elder Futhark runes appear on 2 of those 3. The antler is broken at one end, so a portion of the inscription has been lost, but similar objects have been recovered from Skåne and from Rogaland. All of these date to the late 5th and early 6th centuries, and the legible items feature the titles Tewas and Erilas. Stockland transliterates this side of the handle, read from right to left, as Fulas Tewas. Runes during the Viking period on Bornholm are limited exclusively to runestones and 25 metal amulets of lead, silver, or bronze. No early short-twig inscriptions survive on Bornholm, so all are long-twig. After Sortemuld faded from importance in the late 10th or early 11th centuries, the island fragmented from domination by the single chiefly settlement or central place of Sortemuld into smaller units in a patchwork, and we start to see runestones appearing only after this point. The forms of the runes used on the stones is similar to the long twig runes on the amulets from Bornholm. The amulets, when they can be read, frequently consisted of well-known Christian religious phrases inscribed in runes, with additional phrases against illness or misfortune. The strips of metal, which could be quite long, were then folded so that the inscription is mostly hidden on the inside, which may suggest that the runes were seen as having protective capabilities that did not depend on the ability to read them after they were hidden. The use of Latin on many of them places these amulets in the medieval period, but some vernacular Old Norse amulets have been found in the last few years. Based on the fairly substantial linguistic shifts between the Viking Age and the medieval period, Stockland estimated the inscription of the Bornholm amulet BH61 in particular to date to 1050 to 1150 of the Common Era. Based on the similarity of the runes themselves, the early amulets, like the one from Istermari, and nearby runestones may be roughly contemporary, dating to the 11th and early 12th centuries, with the practice of making runic amulets continuing well into the 13th and 14th centuries. Given the relatively late runic corpus on Bornholm, giving you the 13th century rune row from Bornholm inscription 32, which was written out on the plaster wall in the church at Niker, seems appropriate here. So here's a good option for Bornholm. So what patterns can we identify in runic usage from the Baltic Islands? In many of the Gotlandic picture stones that bear short twig inscriptions, the twigs do fully cross the stave. This is true not only for O, N, A, and B, but also for the T and L runes, which also occur in several inscriptions in both Gotland and in Norway. Islanders often used the rune Ryth interchangeably with the Ir rune, which was typically only used during the Elder Futhark phase when ending words with the R sound. So Ryth can also end words, like in Norway. One characteristic common to the medieval amulets from Bornholm and several inscriptions from 13th and 14th century Gotland is the use of a single-sided maln rune, which otherwise does not appear in a Danish context, though it does occur in the Greenland colony. We also have a direct parallel with the Starajaladuga runes that I mentioned in our last episode, in that the half-height Ir final R rune also appears in the Hangvarskirke 2 runestone. I described dotted runes in episode 10, and by the medieval period, Baltic Islanders used dotted runes extensively. There is a great drawing in Lisbeth Emer's Lumps of Lead article on the Skellingeby 2 inscription, which has dotted I, dotted T, dotted K. All of these appeared extensively during medieval runic usage, but this inscription also shows a dotted L and a dotted N, which are very unusual in a Danish context. Let's revisit dotted runes to do a deeper dive into Irish runic inscriptions, which we'll do in our next episode. Thank you for reading the runes with me, the Modern Erilar.